Let's talk about risk assessment when it comes to compliance engagements. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have this attestation risk, which is the same thing as audit risk. Now, we see audit risk, we have a whole lesson on that. Attestation risk is the risk that the practitioner may unknowingly fail to modify his or her opinion. It's a component of inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. As we see, these are the risks that all make up audit risk as well. So, really, the same thing. It's just audit risk applies to audits, obviously, and attestation risk is the term that we use for any attestation engagements, anything other than audit when we are providing an attestation service. Now, talking about this here, like I said, we do cover this in audit risk. We are going to see inherent risk, which is the risk that any material noncompliance with our criteria exists. And what is this going to really be? Well, if it's a super complex business, it's just risk that's inherent in the company or the entity per se. We've got a complex entity, right? It's going to be harder to possibly catch noncompliance if management is just difficult to work with. That is going to add to inherent risk because if it's hard to work with them, then it may be hard to get details with them and have conversations with them. If you're doing this compliance engagement remote as compared to on-site, that's going to add to the inherent risk because if you're on-site, you can see things, you can see original documents, you can talk to individuals in person. For control risk, this is the risk that material noncompliance that could occur will not be prevented or detected. So concerns here by the entity's control, our concern here is that the internal controls will not prevent or detect any material noncompliance with whatever it is, the laws, the regulations, anything like that. Lastly here, detection risk. This is the risk that the practitioner's procedures will lead him or her to conclude that material noncompliance does not exist when in fact it actually does exist. So this is similar to detection risk when we go to our audit risk, where you're going to reduce this by doing more testing. The more testing you do of the financial statements and of their compliance, the less detection risk you'll have. These two, you're not really going to be able to control. You're not going to have an impact on. Inherent risk is just going to exist. It's the risk inherent just that exists within an entity. And control risk, you can't change an entity's internal controls. You can only uncover this. And if there's a higher control risk, then that's going to affect detection risk. So just lastly here, the audit risk of noncompliance is the risk of material noncompliance, which is assessed by the auditor, times detection risk, which is controlled by the auditor. This is the same thing as audit risk, where we have our risk of material misstatement, which is inherent risk and control risk, we see here. So inherent risk and control risk makes up this, and then times detection risk. And the reason we separate that out is because this is assessed by the auditor, whereas this is controlled by the auditor. Cool, looking good, having a good time, moving along, my fellow future CPAs. Consideration of internal control over compliance. Well, the practitioner should obtain an understanding of relevant portions of internal control over compliance, sufficient to plan the engagement and to assess control risk for compliance. We talk about in different engagement types, right? We've got also many charts. Do you need to assess internal controls and understand the business environment that they operate in? Generally, that's going to be yes. Now, assessing internal controls may not be the case, for example, for preparations and compilations. But here, we need to do it as so much as it allows us to assist in our engagement. In planning the examination, if we have an examination of compliance, such knowledge should be used to identify types of potential noncompliance, to consider factors that affect the risk of material noncompliance, and to design appropriate tests of compliance. So we want to assess internal controls, not in their totality, not 100%, but just so much as it allows us to help do our job, to design tests, to look for the areas of noncompliance. Let's just say theoretically, the engagement, the bank hires you to do an examination of an entity's compliance, really just over their cash reserves. Well, then you're only really going to test their internal controls over cash, right? You're not going to test all of their internal controls. That would just be a little redundant and unnecessary. Lastly here, the risk of material noncompliance and its inverse relationship to the detection risk of noncompliance is the same as the risk of material misstatement and its relationship to detection risk. Essentially saying, the less detection risk we have, right, we're doing less testing. So we're doing less testing there. So that would actually increase our detection risk. The less testing we do, the higher the risk we'll miss something. And the more testing we do, the less the detection risk that we'll actually miss something, right? So essentially saying, if there's a higher risk of material noncompliance, that means we will test more, which will give us a lower risk of detection risk. And if there is a low risk of material noncompliance or material misstatement, so if this is low, then we are going to do less testing, which will give us a higher detection risk. And to see more about that and see the inverse relationship, definitely visit that audit risk lesson. Got quite a bit there with a lot of formulas, numbers, portraying it out very well. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.